Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. Ben McCormick here with Clinton Weaver once again, where we're going to talk some recruiting today. Some exciting recruiting news broke yesterday morning. Cameron and Kaden Boozer committed to Duke University, a commitment that I think a lot of opposing fan bases thought was a foregone conclusion. But I think if you were following this recruitment closely over the last few months, you realize that this was not as cut and dry as it might appear on paper. Yes, they're the sons of Carlos Boozer. Yes, their dad went to Duke, but they're from Miami, and staying close to home is always something that I think speaks to any recruit. And it's difficult to pull anybody away from that. I think it's easy for somebody on the outside to say, well, Duke's home because that's where their dad went. Well, not really. They didn't grow up around Durham. But John Shire dialed in here in the late stages of the recruitment. He got the job done, and Cameron, the number 2 player in the class, Kaden, the number 21 player in the class, committed to Duke. Clinton, where were you when the news, the very early morning news broke?
Well, I was actually at work, and my daughter sent me a text message saying, is it true about the Boozers? And so I checked into Twitter, and yeah, sure enough, it was all over Twitter. And I love the way the announcement went down with the phone call from the brother, and they were kind of teasing at the outset to the idea that they might go to different places, and it's just a really cool way to make the announcement in a low-key way, but also involving their brother, who's been a meaningful part of their life.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about their brother Carmani. We were just talking right before we started recording about this. So there's a E60 documentary about the twins and their older brother Carmani, and kind of the relationship they have, and the kind of unique relationship that they have.
Right, and I highly recommend everybody watch Blood Brothers if they haven't seen that E60 special. I was just watching it this morning, and so Carmani, their older brother, was born with sickle cell, and the parents decided to conceive more siblings for him in hopes of doing a transplantation of stem cells in order to save Carmani's life. And that's how Cameron and Kaden came into existence through IVF. There were 12 embryos that were implanted. Initially, 2 of the 12 were shown to be matches for Carmani, and the doctor advised Cece, the mother, to implant both embryos because there was only a 60% chance of survival if she only did one. So she said, okay, we'll do both. And so those 2 embryos turned out to be Cameron and Kaden. And they did the stem cell transplantation and saved their brother's life. So now they sort of give each other the business. Carmani says to his brothers that they wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. And Cameron and Kaden give it right back to him and say, well, you wouldn't be here if it weren't for us. And so it's a really unique relationship. And I love the way that they brought Carmani into the announcement on the video.
Yeah, I loved the way that they did their commitment. I think that that's a really really cool thing that not everybody knew about, and so I think it's great that they involved Carmani in that. But my only thing that I'm bringing up here is whatever happened to the making a 7 p.m. on this date. We're going to announce the commitment on ESPN. I guess that's the evolution of social media, is that's just dead. Everybody just drops their commitment at whatever time they feel like. And so,
Yeah, I think Khan was the lowest of the low key last year. I think it was like in the middle of a Duke football game that he announced that he was coming to Duke, and it's like, oh, okay, come on.
yeah, dudes they just go. It's out of the blue. I mean, that one yesterday was just at 9 something in the morning,
Right.
and so like I thankfully was on my phone when it broke, and I've had stuff ready in the drafts now for about a month. And so I kicked it out of drafts, and I had it up within 30 seconds of it breaking, and I was happy about that. But I remember like Paulo Banchero broke in like middle of the night, and on a I don't remember what month it was. It might have been August. It was very random when Paulo committed, and it was out of nowhere. Like no one thought his recruitment was coming to a close at that point. And I remember just being like, "Oh crap, okay, I guess." And so I think that's interesting, the place we're at in commitment breaking, because I have this video on YouTube. It's like the most popular one on the Duke Wisdom channel. That was like every commitment from Kyrie to Zion, and it's got little clips of all of their ESPN commitments and whatnot. And it's kind of difficult to make a second version of that, even though Duke's recruiting has not let up at all. Because it's like, well, what am I going to do? Show like a 6-second clip of just a still of Paulo Banchero's tweet? you know?
Well, they each have their own way of doing it, and certainly social media has opened up a whole different avenue for making that happen in terms of taking my talents to fill in the blank.
Yeah, they can get pretty creative, I think, with them though. So I like it. I'm not actually complaining. I think that it's cool. It's just evolving. That's all it is.
Right.
And so let's talk a little bit more about Cameron and Kaden and what they bring to the table. So I want to hear your thoughts first about what you think they bring to the program and to the team next year.
Well, after watching that special, I'm very intrigued about the connection between the two of them because I think it is a special connection. And, Duke has had relatives who've played, but never twins like this. And I really do feel like they have a unique bond and connection that you can see on the basketball court, the way they are aware of where each other is on the court. And, I think we're going to really enjoy watching that for 1 year, maybe. Seems like Cameron will probably be out the door after 1 year. But Cameron, obviously taller, more versatile with his ability to score at all three levels. He's putting a lot of muscle on, and he's developing an inside game. Great court awareness and a strong motor, maybe second only to Cooper Flagg in terms of his motor. And then Kaden, of course, at the point guard and more the distributor of the ball. Stockier build, obviously around 6'1", 6'2". But I'm going to be most interested in seeing how they play off of each other and that brotherly connection that, began in utero.
It's not every year that you get a package deal. I mean, I'm sort of going back and thinking of Jaleel Okafor and Tyus Jones, who committed to Duke at the same time, and were always kind of heralded as that package deal out of high school. And you think about the connection that those two guys had. They were just, they were best friends. And the connection that they had on the court, imagine that, but brothers, twin brothers at that. And what you kind of touched on that. I mean, what's that connection going to look like on the court? I mean, we've never seen it. And so I think that's going to be really interesting to see that unfold on the floor. Very excited to get both of them. I know that John is elated about it. I know that he's elated to get Cameron, especially because Duke didn't really put their hat in the ring for any other big men in the class of 2025. They're gonna lose Kaman after this year. That's pretty much set in stone, more or less. So, what were they gonna do in the interior? I mean, they'll have Malik Brown presumably next season. They'll have Pat next year, but they kind of needed another inside presence to be a top 5 team again next year. And I think that getting Cameron for the inside helps them really bolster that case. He's going to be a huge part of what they do. And then with Kaden, if you lose Tyrese, like I'm thinking they might, there's a chance of losing Caleb as well. But I'm not going to go out and say that that's a definitive or anything. It's not a definitive for either of them. But you'll lose probably at least one out of the two. And if that's the case, now you have another point guard that's going to come onto the roster because you probably don't have another returning point guard like player. And you want to have at least 2 guys like that on the roster. So Kaden gives you at least depth, if not another potential starting player in the backcourt that can help distribute the ball at a high level. And so I think that these two guys, these two brothers, bring very different things to the table, but will be able to play together in unison in a way that maybe we've never seen before. And so I think that's really, really, really intriguing.
Yeah, and the 4-year players are pretty much gone for the most part, vanishing breed for sure. But the word is Kaden might be around for several years, and I hope that's true. I hope he hits that sweet spot where he's good but not great, so that he ends up sticking around for more than 1 year. I kind of yearn for the good old days where the great players were still 4-year players and we got to enjoy them for more than a single season. But we're definitely set up, at least for the next 2 years, with Cooper reclassifying for this year, really opened the door and paved the way for the Boozers to come. And now we got the Boozers we know coming, and that's just the start of recruitment, of course, for next year. But I'm feeling pretty good about the next 2 years, and really looking forward to watching both of those teams.
Yeah, I too yearn for the good old days where players stayed longer. If anybody really follows, I talk about it a lot here on the podcast. I put out articles about it. Like, I'm a Duke basketball history and statistical nerd. There's really no other way to put it. And so I love the 1,000 point club. That is something that I obsess over that. And we went 7 years without putting anybody into the 1,000 point club until Jeremy Roach crossed, and then Kyle did this past year. So I just love having more guys cross into that every year. Seems like Tyrese is gonna this year. If Caleb stays for junior year, he might. And so if Caden's gonna be a guy that can get to that point in his career, then I'm gonna love him. I'm gonna love him. If he's putting himself in the record book, then that gives you an A+ in my book. Because I love that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, through the lens of retroflexion now that they've committed to Duke, it kind of feels like it was meant to be. I know there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of wondering if they might go to Miami. But Carlos went to Duke. He met his wife at Duke. Cameron is named after the gym,
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah.
How could it be anything else, really? I was watching a Locked On UNC podcast from a year ago, and they were hopeful a year ago that they might get the Boozers, and they were considering Kentucky at one point, Florida, but really, I think it just has to feel, obviously, now that we know, but has to feel that it's really destiny, for them to come to Duke and follow in their father's footsteps.
It would have been sacrilegious if they had gone to Carolina. I think there's no way.
Right.
There's no way that could have gone down. But speaking of some family ties, we've talked plenty about the fact that the Boozers have family ties to Duke. Obviously, their father Carlos was an All-American at Duke. He was the 2002 ACC Tournament MVP, and most notably, perhaps, he was a national champion in 2001. And then he went on to be an Olympic gold medalist and a 2-time NBA All-Star during a, I believe, 14-year or 13-year, one of the two, 13-year NBA career, I believe, from 2002 to 2015. Ended his career with the Lakers, notably played for the Jazz and the Bulls. So obviously the Boozers now have a claim to fame in the lore of Duke basketball for having a very, very tenured family with the Boozer name. But there's been a lot of different families, I think, that could have some claims. So I want to talk about who are some of the best Duke basketball families of all time, and I want to get our opinions on who might be the best Duke family of all time. So a couple that I'm going to throw out there are the Plumlees. Obviously, I think you can't have this conversation without the Plumlees. Now, all three of the Plumlees aren't necessarily all of them at the same level, or all of them historically great, I suppose. Miles was good. Marshall was good, especially in his last year. Mason was great. Mason was an All-American. but all three of them national champions. I mean, when are you going to get three brothers coming through the program who were all on the same team at one point in time, all three national champions? I mean, that's just crazy that they were able to accomplish that. And then beyond them, the next pair of brothers I want to bring into this, Tyus Jones and Trey Jones. Obviously, Tyus a national champion, a Final Four most outstanding player, and Trey a ACC player and Defensive Player of the Year in his sophomore season. So I think it's hard to compete with those accolades as well. And the last pairing I'm going to bring up is maybe a little bit more of an unconventional one, but a Coach K and a Michael Savarino pairing, which is cool. I think not whether Michael was making a huge impact on the court or not, having that legendary coach at Duke and his grandson getting to play for him, I think is a very cool pairing.
Well, Savarino's biggest impact on the game and the team was probably taking Paulo to that party over in Mebane that he shouldn't have taken him to, but that's probably one that Coach K would rather not remember. In terms of the Plumleys, that was kind of like a buy one get two free as far as I'm concerned. Mason was definitely the Plumlee, if you will, and the other two, yeah, I mean, we'll take them.
Miles played in the NBA for 7 years. He did all right.
All right. Well, we'll give him that. And then Marshall bringing up the rear for sure. But the Jones brothers, the dynamic duo, it would have been interesting to have them at the same time, the way that we've got the Boozer boys coming along. And then there's one more that comes to mind still in the wings, and that would be the Knipple clan. There's not only Kahn, but Kinston, Cash, Kidman, and Kager. So who knows? We might end up with 5 Knipples before it's all over with.
5 Knipples would be a legendary crew. I mean, that's a Fab Five of Knipples. So that would be something else to get to witness that. In terms of who I think the best family is, I think the Boozers are going to have a really good chance at that. I think the Plumleys might be the most iconic in terms of like everyone recognizing them as a family at Duke. But in terms of actual like impact and how good they were as players, I think at the moment, I think you got to go with the Jones brothers, just because what they accomplished.
Yeah, so far I would agree with you. The Boozers, it's going to be unique because they're there at the same time, and they're twins, and they play different positions that are very complementary to one another. So as it stands right now, I think potentially they will have the biggest impact on the program of any set of brothers.
Yeah. So big recruiting get for Jon Scheyer. Yesterday, I crunched some numbers. This is the 4th recruiting class now for Jon. And in this class, I mean, he's not done in this recruiting class, obviously. But so far, he has 16 top 25 recruits. And he has six top 5 recruits in those 4 classes. So those 6 top 5 recruits means that Jon has landed 30% of the top 5 across these 4 recruiting classes, which is more or less 1 in every 3 top 5 recruits commits to Duke, which I think that's something else.
Not bad.
Definitely not bad. And so I kind of want to just ask this question that it's like, is Jon Scheyer doing a better job than he was with Coach K? And the caveat to that is because I think obviously it's more or less the same. He's doing the same job that was being done in the latter years of Coach K's career. But is it more impressive now that Jon has been able to continue this without tacking a national championship to his name and without having Coach K at the helm to be like, look, you can play for the GOAT?
Well, Jon is obviously knocking it out of the park in terms of recruitment. There's no denying that. And he's really been doing it for years, going back to really since he joined the staff. So no change. The knock on Jon right now is, but what has he done on the court? And I'm not really unhappy with what he's done on the court. Winning an ACC tournament, would have had an ACC regular season championship if it weren't for that blown call at UVA a couple of years ago, making the Elite Eight last year. Sure, they lost to state, but it was the Elite Eight. And I'm expecting Final Fours probably the next couple of years. I think, people need to take a little time out and step back if they consider that to be anything other than tremendous success. And I think back to Coach K, he went to the Final Four, 86, 88, 89, 90, couldn't win the Final Four, lost by 30 to UNLV. And we were all sitting around saying, can this guy do it or not? Turned out he could do it.
Yeah.
So let's cut John a little bit of slack and give him a few years. And I think we're all going to be feeling kind of silly after we see what kind of results he's able to generate on the court.
Yeah, I think patience is a virtue, And so it took Coach K until his 13th season at Duke to win a national championship. Like you said, it took him a while. And I really look back to everybody's likes to talk about, well, he's getting all these recruits. What's he doing with them? Well, you talked about it. ACC championship in that first year, and then an Elite Eight in the second year. I think with a guy in his mid-30s who's in his first 2 years as a head coach, I don't think that's bad. Anybody else that's in their first 2 years as a head coach, if you win the ACC and go to the Elite Eight in back-to-back seasons, you're considered one of the best coaches in that school's history already.
Right.
But at Duke, the bar is just so high that everybody's like, well, hadn't won a national title in 2 years. Then what are you doing, bud? But I'm like, yes, he's getting these top recruits. And I want to drill this point home as much as I can. I don't think people genuinely realize just how difficult it is to win national titles with 17 and 18-year-old players leading your team every year. Because look at some of the teams Coach K had at the end of his tenure. 2017 had Jason Tatum, Harry Giles, Luke Kennard, Frank Jackson on it. Got a 2 seed, won the ACC, but out in the second round. Next year, Marvin Bagley, Grayson Allen is a senior, even Wendell Carter, though, Gary Trent, 2 seed. Probably should have gone to the Final Four, but falls just shy. 2019, Zion, RJ, Cam, Trey, same thing, falls just shy of the Final Four. Was a championship level team, but margins are razor thin in March. You do one thing wrong, you have one bad day, and it's really easy to have a bad day when your team is led by 18-year-olds. You have that one bad day, and you're home. You're going home. Winning the national title is just incredibly difficult as it is, and to do it with that much youth, and now an added layer of now your coach is also younger and trying to figure out the way he wants to run a program himself. How do you come into every season right now with the expectation that he has to win a national title or bust? I think that's a little ludicrous to have that expectation of him.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Duke fans are a little bit spoiled with success. I'm old enough to remember when Duke was not so successful back in the early 70s, Bucky Waters and his 4-year stint and a losing record in year 4 and the stands being about, 3/4 full and tickets were easy to come by. But we've had a lot of success for a long time and the game has changed. Even LNER had to learn how to win and it took him a while. I remember him clanking some free throws against Arizona, but then he learned from that and he made the free throws against Kentucky. We don't have that luxury anymore of watching a player go through a 4-year growth and progression and learning on the job. A lot of one and dones nowadays, and that's a whole different thing to ask an 18-year-old to perform at that level versus somebody who's in the program for 3 or 4 years, like LNER and Hurley and even Grant Hill, back in the day.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. or you can DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network to DM at Duke_Wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up Leitner because I've seen some people that would be like, there were some early comparisons between Leitner and Kyle Filipowski's games. And everybody would always be like, well, Leitner wasn't like this when he was an underclassman. He was dominating like Flip wasn't. And I want to push back on that a little bit. I'm not saying Kyle's better than Christian Leitner, but I think that there was a little bit of a failsafe for Christian Leitner as an underclassman because, especially as a freshman, it was like, well, if he's not leading the team, Danny Ferry is. And so it was like he's not being leaned on constantly as an 18-year-old, but Kyle Filipowski was. And so I think they're very different roles. Like Shane Battier didn't have to take over the team the day he walked in. Grant Hill didn't have to take over the team the day he walked in. Danny Ferry didn't have to take over the team the day he walked in. But Cooper Flagg does. Zion Williamson did. Cameron Boozer will. And so they're very different roles, very different expectations, and a much larger weight being put on freshmen' shoulders that wasn't previously happening with some of the Duke basketball greats. There were some freshmen, like Johnny Dawkins was the best player probably on the team in 1983. And so that certainly it happened, but it was a lot less frequent than it does now.
Yeah, it's definitely different. And, people want to talk about Leitner and his career going to 4 Final Fours. Well, he didn't win the first 2 of those, So viewing the career through the lens of the 4-year span, it's a little bit different. He wasn't always Leitner until he became Leitner, and it took some time, and we don't have that luxury anymore.
Yeah. So speaking of some legends and players like that, let's go over some of the program defining recruits that Duke has nabbed throughout the years. I'm gonna go over some of the more recent guys that Duke has nabbed. I'll let you take some of the guys that I wasn't around to watch. I know about them, but I wasn't around to watch them. But I think recently when you talk about program defining recruits, I think it's difficult to leave Cooper Flagg out of the conversation because this is definitely the biggest recruit that John Shire has landed in his tenure as head coach so far, and he's just one of the most high-profile recruits that Duke has landed, period. So I think that is definitely a name to bring up. I think another name to bring up, and this might be a little bit of an unpopular name to bring up in this conversation. I just talked about him, but Kyle Filipowski. And this is maybe an unconventional pick for me because Kyle's not exactly... And he's a second-team All-American. Don't get me wrong; he's a very good player, but he's not as quite as to the level as some of the other players we're going to mention. But I think he's extremely important in the history of Duke basketball because he was a top 3 recruit, or top 5, depending on where you looked, and he was the first player to ever commit to John Shire's Duke basketball. And I think that was a huge, huge thing to happen, to have a player of that caliber have that much trust in a coach that had never been a head coach. And so I think that he was a very important recruit in Duke basketball history. And then before him, I think obviously Zion Williamson. You can see the recruiting impacts that getting Zion has had. I mean, most of the players talk about, Kaman Malawach has talked about, I didn't really know about Duke until I saw Zion, and then it's like, oh, this is where Zion went. That's a big deal. So I think that it's big for the brand for Zion Williamson, and I think that you've got to talk about Kyrie Irving as well, because Kyrie, there had been 2 one-and-dones prior to Kyrie, Luol Deng in 2004 and Corey Maggette in 1999, but when you talk about Kyrie ushered in the one-and-done era at Duke University. After him, you've had a one-and-done like every single season except for one. 2013 was the one time that it didn't happen, but you've had a one-and-done every year since. And so he ushered in a completely new era of Duke basketball. And then of course what he's done in the NBA has had similar recruiting impacts to Zion Williamson, that guys see that, oh crap, Kyrie went here, I can be like him. So that's kind of some of the modern big recruiting gets, and I'll let you touch on those guys as well, and bring up some of the guys that predate my expertise.
Right. Well, I was just watching a podcast interview with Gene Banks this morning, which was very interesting. He was the first McDonald's All-American to come to Duke, and his commitment to Duke was quite unexpected. In 1970, he was 77, 78, and took that team to the championship game against Kentucky. And at the time, he was like the number one recruit in the country. He was being recruited by UCLA, Notre Dame, big powerhouses at the time. UNC was after him. And Gene was telling the story. He didn't know where he was going to go, and his mother told him to pray about it. And he said he fell asleep and he had a dream about Duke. And next morning, he made the announcement that he was going to Duke. And everybody was like, why in the hell are you going to Duke? Because Duke was the nothing burger at the time, other than Tate Armstrong had been an Olympian. But he decided he wanted to change the fate of the program, and he did. He also, changed the thinking about Duke among people who lived in Durham, along with John Harrell, who transferred over from NC Central. And, prior to Gene's arrival, Duke was, the white school, and viewed at some arm's length relationship among local Durhamites who were more likely to pull for UNC or NC State. So, he was a critical linchpin, I think, for changing perceptions of the program in a lot of different ways. Number one recruit, McDonald's All-American, and he was the bridge from the Bill Foster era over to the Coach K era. So I want to give him his flowers. He definitely deserves it. And then Johnny Dawkins came. He was the next big one, where it was a fierce recruiting battle nationwide. And then Danny Ferry after that. Those are the three that really come to mind for me as big national recruitments that Duke sort of unexpectedly won and beat out the competition 8 miles down the road, and were part of really changing the whole trajectory of the program and making Coach K look like a really intelligent coach.
I think that Gene Banks is such an important figure in Duke basketball history, like you mentioned, and I think it's kind of funny to make a comparison that he is the bridge, like you said, between Bill Foster and Coach K, and then it's funny to sort of compare him that the bridge between John and K was Jeremy Roach, and like it's no shade on Jeremy Roach, but like I think that two very different players. And it's just kind of funny that that's the way it panned out. And then the last existing bridges between the two most recent coaches are Stanley Borden and Spencer Hubbard, the two greatest Duke basketball players of all time.
Yeah, a little different.
Yeah, I'm proud that Stanley will probably be the last remaining bridge if he uses a fifth year. That's great for the free Stanley Borden brand, I think, at least.
Right. Well, I'm sure I'm dating myself, and there are other great players, of course, from the past that if we went back further in the time machine, we could speak about people like Heyman and Grote, and Duke had some Final Four teams, 3 Final Four teams in the early 60s that critics don't want to acknowledge, but Duke's really been good at basketball for a long time. They just ran into a buzzsaw called UCLA back then. Otherwise, they might have hung some banners a lot earlier than Coach K.
Yeah, I think it's easy to write off pre-Coach K Duke, but like how many programs have 4 Final Fours? heading into their coach that wins them titles. It's not that common, especially then it wasn't that common. And so, yeah, you mentioned Art Heyman, and I think Heyman is a really important figure in Duke basketball history that people look past, because if Art Heyman, if they played 4 seasons in the 60s, I think that Art Heyman could be the leading scorer in the history of Duke basketball. I mean, he's putting up ridiculous numbers, and he was able to help lead Duke to its first ever Final Four, which is no easy task. So definitely a very important figure in Duke basketball history.
It's safe to say that anybody who's got their jersey hanging in the rafters probably had a pretty profound influence on the team and the institution.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. So let's go into our last topic for the episode. I just want to talk a little bit, and we're gonna have a more at length discussion about the breaking down the full schedule. That'll happen in the next week or two, right before we head into official play, and we'll preview the Lincoln exhibition as well, which is happening a week from today when this episode will drop. So, but let's talk about right now just some of the games on the schedule that we're most looking forward to seeing how those pan out. Actually, I'll let you go first. I want to hear your takes on this before I give my own.
Well, I think there's some obvious answers. You know, we lost 2 to Carolina last year, so it's time for revenge. And anytime we play Carolina, that's the big game times 2. Beyond that, Auburn. My brother and I fought pretty vociferously about who was going to get the Auburn tickets. And luckily I have them, so looking forward to that one.
There you go.
And, Kansas will be interesting because both Duke and UNC play Kansas. We've got them on a neutral site, whereas UNC has to go to Rupp. So we'll see. That'll be an indirect comparison to see how we stack up against the team 8 miles down the road.
I think the ones I'm looking most forward to are the back-to-back games with Arizona, who got us in Cameron last year, and then to Kansas and Vegas. And I say that because I'm fairly confident that Duke's going to beat Kentucky. Knock on wood on that, but I'm pretty, I don't think Kentucky's all that. And so the Auburn game should be a good one. I'm more confident in that one than I was in Arkansas last season for a couple of reasons. Because I think this Duke team is better, 1. And 2, because a road game is always, in non-conference play, is always one of your toughest games. Your first real road test is one of your toughest games of the season. And it really didn't matter how good Arkansas was. I just kind of thought they were going to lose that game. But with Auburn coming into Cameron, it's sort of like, okay, Duke might be all right here. But then going into Arizona, a team that beat them last year, a team that has Caleb freaking Love on the roster at that, you got to beat them. You got to win that game. You can't get swept. So,
I don't know how I left Arizona out. I was at that game last year, which was horrible, watching Caleb Love beat us in Cameron again. So 100%, we got to beat Arizona at their place. It's time for revenge and drive a stake through the heart of that dude. I mean, how many years has he been around?
Too many.
Too many years. They've got to send Caleb Love out with a loss. And then winning that game, to me, is a statement. It's a statement, and it opens up the door that it's like, well, okay, if you're going to lose to Kansas, I don't want to say any loss is okay, but if you're going to lose to Kansas, all right, because now you've beat Arizona, and that loss might be your only loss in non-conference if you lose to Kansas. So cool, that's all right. But if you lose to Arizona, now you have this pressure that's like, can't lose back-to-back. Can't lose 2 in a row. You're too good of a team to lose 2 in a row. So now you got to beat Kansas. Like, you just got to beat them. And so that's a tough position to put yourself in. But there's the other side that's like, well, what if you beat both of them? Sure.
You beat both of them, you're looking at the number 1 team in the country. And so that could be a really big defining moment for this team, I think. Those 2 games are good.
Right. Well, those are good points, and it will take the pressure off to to beat Arizona and then put the cherry on top with the win over Kansas. So I'll take that.
Yeah, we'll take it. We'll take it. As always, thank you guys for listening to the podcast. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast, and follow Duke Wisdom on Instagram and Twitter/X. And make sure to check out some articles. We've had some Duke Wisdom Network articles going up this week, some recruiting stuff from our guy Ty Scott. Make sure to go give those a read. We have another article coming pretty soon as well, so make sure to check that out. And as always, we'll talk to you guys later.